Carlota, could you tell us a little bit about your background, where you're teaching, and what kind of research you're working on?
I do research in a lot of places. I work in 3 UK universities, Cambridge, Sussex, and now London School of Economics. I teach in Estonia, in Tallinn, in a master's course which is sponsored by the European Union about technology governance in the Tallinn University of Technology. And I keep in touch with reality. I work a lot with business people. I do a lot of keynote speeches, consultancy for business and for government. So, you know, I have a foot in each place because it's important.
Well, that's a lot of travel and work, it sounds like. But let's talk a little bit about how you came to study technological revolutions, which is the work that I'm so interested in and have read a bunch about. What caused you to come to that area to study?
I'm a Venezuelan. In the 1970s, I was working for the government on technology policy and transfer of technology things, you know, the world, what was happening and so on. And then the energy crisis came. And my question was, what will this do for technology? I mean, if oil is very expensive, which at that time it was, then it became cheap. But anyway, at that time it looked like, you know, a huge change. What will that do for technology? Technology was all about electricity, all about automobiles, fuel, all about plastics, you know, new things, electrical appliances, all these things. Will it continue that way? So as I was doing my research, I came upon an article by Business Week where they talked about this new thing, microelectronics, this new thing that was capable of saving energy, of increasing productivity all over the place, new products, new things. Goodness me, this is it. Cheap, and it was cheap. That was important. So I said, this is it. Microelectronics is going to replace cheap microelectronics will replace cheap oil in the direction of technology.
And you had this vision in the 70s?
This was in the mid-70s, yeah, with the energy crisis, 74, 75. So Intel microprocessor had been in 71, and that's what this article was about. So from then on, it was really easy to discover that change had happened by successive technological revolutions. And since then, I've done nothing but study that through history.
So there are 5 technological revolutions that you talk about in your book. Can you list them just for everybody's benefit?
Yeah, well, the first one was just the Industrial Revolution. That was machines and canals. Canals was the internet of the time, of course. Then we have the second, which is railways, basically, and machines in general, but the steam engine for railways with iron. Then we get the third, which is at the end of the 19th century, just the beginning of the 20th century. That was heavy engineering based on cheap steel. And that was chemicals, electrical, naval engineering, the big bridges and all the big engineering projects. That was that sort of period, the third surge. The fourth revolution was, of course, the automobile, the assembly line automobile, because the automobile had been invented before, but it's the assembly line that makes the automobile replace horse carriages and replace bicycles and replace trains and everything else. So it's the automobile, it's radio, it's airplanes, it's electrical appliances in general. That's mass production, really. And then we come to our information revolution, which is the fifth.
Right, and so an interesting aspect of these revolutions is that there's the installation phase, and then there's the deployment phase. And there's something that happens between the two. What happens, what is the, in every single one of these, there's something that happens between the installation phase and the deployment phase. What is that?
A huge bubble and a huge crash.
Okay, and it's happened every time?
Every time. We had canal mania and canal panic, we had railway mania and railway panic, and so on, and then we had the Roaring Twenties and the 1929 crash, and now this time we had 2. But we had the NASDAQ crash, and then we had the 2008 crash. Okay. They're both bubbles and both crashes.
So when your book came out in 2002, my partner and I were just getting started with Union Square Ventures, we read your book, and we had this aha moment that we were now moving from the installation phase of the internet to the deployment phase of the internet. And that guided pretty much our entire investment thesis. But the interesting thing is we got a second bubble. This time we got a second bubble. And that's the bubble that happened in 2005, 2006, crashing in 2007, 2008. Can you talk a little bit about the second bubble?
Well, the thing is that every one of these phenomena is unique because every one of these revolutions is unique. This one happens to be about information, and information happens to be what finance works with. So in fact, we had a first bubble, which was the NASDAQ, that was about setting up the technologies. That was about investing in the technologies and setting up the internet. That was, the internet bubble, really, and the web, .com bubble is about using the internet, so that's the beginning. The second one was really about finance innovating with software and with internet and with the technology and doing all these crazy financial innovations, some of which were real and some of which were just horrible things, thanks to software and thanks to internet, and they were able to sell to little communities somewhere in the north of Norway or to wherever, to the Chinese, to the Indians. I mean, the whole possibility of making it a globalization bubble. So in fact, this time we have had these two bubbles in the middle of this revolution, but the meaning of each of those collapses is what's important, because they're not black swans. These things have a meaning, and they happen each time. And what they mean is that the technological revolution has been fully installed, and now it can help the rest of all industries innovate. And what we have is a huge capacity for wealth creation across all industries, thanks to these new technologies that help every industry innovate. And we also have the possibility of a huge wave of well-being across the globe this time.
And you call these periods of well-being the golden ages or the gilded ages. Can you talk a little bit about what happens in these golden ages and give us a sense of where we are right now?
Okay, well, we are precisely in what I've called the turning point. The turning point is the recession that comes after the bubble collapse. And that turning point is generally the time when people discover that all that beautiful prosperity that was the bubble, in fact, was underneath. There were a lot of problems. And when this collapse happens, the real economy starts showing the problems. And then you get unemployment and you get all sorts of problems because then you discover that much of the wealth that's done in the bubble is really false wealth. It's just sort of extracting it from the economy. But much of the money was not invested in producing real wealth. There was no real increase in productivity. There was just a lot of betting. It's a casino, really. This last bubble in particular was very much a casino. So what you get is now we're paying the price in terms of the real economy having all the pain where somehow perhaps we saved the financial world too easily. But at this time, what you get then is the understanding of what happened, if you get it, and then you do institutional innovation, a whole recomposition so that you create conditions for a true wave of wealth creation to happen. And that means business and government have to work together to find a way to do that.
And what kinds of things need to happen? What do government and business need to come together to create? And why are we having such a hard time getting government and business to come together and create these things?
Well, in this particular occasion, I think, frankly, that what's happening is that the usual inertia that governments have, I mean, it's very difficult. Governments are bureaucratic institutions that find it very difficult to change unless they have enormous pressure. But the pressure that the government is getting, that the governments are getting today, is much more from the financial world that wants to keep the status quo and from the old dinosaurs. I mean, it's the old industries that are pressurizing government, whereas I feel that this time the new industries are keeping apart. They're not participating in this game. They're not really putting forth the vision.
So
and
in-
you know,
in-
last time around, when we had mass production, GM, the boss of GM, said, what's good for GM is good for the country, is good for America, and what's good for America is good for GM. And he was right, because in mass production, the automobile industry was the center of that whole wave. And suburbia, you know, you needed the automobile to have suburban housing, so you had Fannie Mae so people could have houses, and then the houses had electrical appliances, so then you can get business to innovate in these things because you had huge demand. So it was good for GM and it was good for the country.
So now the rallying cry should be what's good for technology is good for the country.
What's good for IT is good for the world. What's good for the world is good for the IT industries. And what's good for the IT industries is good for the US.
Right.
Also, I mean, it's not just the US, it's for the whole world actually, because this is a global technology.
So the people who are the leading industrialists of this generation, the technology entrepreneurs who have led us to this place, need to engage with policymakers and the government to come up with the right steps to take. Is that right?
I absolutely think so. And I think I can understand why they haven't. Because during the Silicon Valley times, there was this idea, you know, at first there was a lot of military things for the, you know, all the chips and all these things were at first done for the military. But after a while, what the military wanted didn't fit what the market wanted. So, you know, so the companies started pulling away from the government markets and actually pulling out of government influence. And not only that, in order to get the whole of the information revolution going, it was very important to get rid of some of the old government obstacles, sort of thing, because those were made especially to fit the previous revolution, the mass production one. So it was important. So this culture of free markets and government out actually happens every time there is a technological, that's what technological revolution, that's what the installation period is about. The first 20 or 30 years of each revolution are about government out, finance in. Finance and free markets make sure that everybody competes, and then markets decide who are the winners, who are the companies that really make it, which are the products that people really want. So you start getting like an understanding of the market, and also because each revolution brings a new logic, a new paradigm. So you modernize every other industry.
Right. So let's do
and
this.
That's what finance does.
Let's use the automobile and mass production revolution and just give some examples of the kinds of policies that were put in place during the beginning of that golden age that made it happen. What kinds of things happened?
Many things happened. I mean, the welfare state was set up. The welfare state has some simple things which are very important. First of all, you have unemployment insurance. If you are buying a house and a car and electrical appliance to put in it, which was the whole business, the whole idea was that people should all have that because that's what innovation was about in that revolution, you had to buy them in installment payings. You had to pay every month. So if you lost your job for 4 months, you would be turning in the cars and the refrigerators and the house. So you had Fannie Mae, which was created in the 30s precisely for that period, and you had unemployment insurance so that people could continue making their payments, and you had pensions so that people could spend their full income every month because they knew that at the end they would have a pension.
Okay, so those are the kinds of things that happened in the last revolution. What kinds of things do we need to do now? It sounds like we need to move away from mass production to a different paradigm, to a paradigm that's less about consumption. Is that right?
Well, less about consumption of material goods, less about consumerism, less about buying the same thing 17 times in a lifetime because it's produced in order to make you buy it again and again and again. It's more about health, about enjoyment. It has to be high quality of life, and it has to be the good life. But a good life that has now less materials, less energy consumption, more enjoyment, more communication, more interaction, more social living, more creativity, participation. more services in general, health services, coaching, more exercise, more all these things, but with an idea that that's a good life. I know, sometimes the green people talk about what has to happen almost like we have to have guilt, we have to be instead of thinking that it's lovely to live healthy. So we would reduce enormously the amount of materials needed to make the good life. And all of the Chinese and all of the Indians, if they wanted to all have the American way of life the way we have it now, we need 7 planets and we only have 1.
Right.
So we have to make it sustainable and we have to make it lovely. It has to be aspirational, that this is the good life to have, and of course it means revamping the whole of the infrastructure, making all products durable, so you have to redesign products. We would have maintenance. We would have first, second, third, fourth hands, products. I remember in my youth, refrigerators used to last 20 years perfectly well. So why can't they now when we have more technology? Because the idea is to have planned obsolescence so that they last only 4 years or 5 years, so maybe 1 year or maybe 6 months, different things.
So I'm curious to get your take on some of the sort of societal unrest that's going on. You have a good example of that here in the United States with this Occupy Wall Street movement. Where do you think that comes from, and is that also typical in these technological revolutions at this stage where we are now?
Yes, it's definitely typical. And how I understand it, these people and the Spanish indignants and all the ones that have happened, not exactly the Arab Spring, but all these ones are anger. They're angry. They're angry at the financial people who made all that money and that didn't benefit them. They're angry because youth has no future. Youth unemployment everywhere is much higher than regular unemployment. It's in the US, I believe it's 21%. In Spain, it's 45, 50%. I mean, we're really talking about a whole generation that's horrified of not having a future. So, and if you think, for instance, even the entrepreneurs and the people who try on their own to do their things, there is no social net for them. Society has not understood that we are no longer in a job for life society, that we're in a very complicated society. We are in a society where human capital is very important, so you have to go to university. Now university is more expensive than ever. When it wasn't that important, it was free, and now it's dead for life. So it's all lopsided, it's all organized in the wrong way. When human capital is the most important thing for the future and for every person, you've got to have a society that's capable of having that net.
So back in the era of mass production, there was this notion of Keynesian economics where the government would intervene to create demand.
Yes.
Is that an outdated concept?
Well, you still have to intervene to create demand. That's one of the problems. Right now we have this problem, there isn't enough consumption and therefore there won't be enough investment. But the thing is that just to create enough money in the hands of people is not enough. You've got to also find a way of getting business to agree, in some way creating consensus in society for a vision of a different way of life, and therefore setting then a direction for innovation. And I think that direction is the green direction, the sustainability direction, because that creates an enormous amount of possibilities for innovation, and it also creates an enormous amount of possibilities for jobs. All those people who have lost their jobs to China, and that's inevitable, they're not coming back. Industry has gone. So all these people, what are they going to do? Well, if you have a green society, you have recycling, you have disassembly, you have maintenance, you have waste disposal, you have renewing the whole of the infrastructure, you have a renewal of buildings, of everything, redesign products so that they use less material and less energy, so that they're more durable. So all that redesigning, all that rethinking, plus the enormous amount of services that can have that, the creative industries and all these other things. So we have a whole range of things that are associated to a different consumption pattern.
Do you see any places in the world where government and business is coming together to create these situations for success? Is this starting to happen anywhere in the world?
Well, the very serious thing is that the only people that are having real success are the people who are not coming together, but just the Chinese who are doing the thing. And they're saying what to do, and they're doing enormous amount of R&D, and they're getting everybody employed, and they're really growing, and with a lot of help.
In the right directions?
Well, they're spending a lot in new green things. I mean, they've taken over the solar energy things. They've taken over practically. It's amazing what they have done. But anyway, that's not the model where we want to follow. We want to see what happens in the West. And I think there is a crisis of leadership which is absolutely appalling. Because politicians are now thinking that if they control finance so that there are no more bubbles, and if they can solve the deficit problem, with that we're going back to business as usual. They're crazy. That's over. Business as usual doesn't exist. What we have ahead of us is as different from the last 20 years. The options we have ahead are as different from the last 20 years as the post-war boom was from the roaring 20s. And if governments don't do anything, it's going to be much more like the 30s. We're going to have 7 or 10 years of horror if we don't understand that it's not a question of controlling finance. It's a question of making finance leave the casino and move over to fund the real economy. And what you do, how you do that, is to change the incentive system in such a way that you make much more money if you fund the real economy than if you go in the casino, because we're going to tax you, because we're going to make you, anything you do, we're going to tax transactions, we're going to, think. You've got to think. Bold innovation, institutional innovation massively, in order to make sure that finance is not punished. Finance is reoriented, is incentivized to move in the direction of the real economy. That's the first thing. And the other things that have to be done are about structural change in the economy, which also mean doing various other policies that will regulate in favor of the green economy. And the other thing that has to happen is that somehow we have global control of finance. You can't control finance nationally anymore. Finance just works in the cloud.
But isn't the EU an example of the failure of a multinational economic model?
It is a failure up to now in some ways. And I think the main problem that has happened is that this leadership does not understand that structural change, that real direction, you have to work with society and with business to create a vision to start moving in that direction, to get people excited about investing in good directions. Up to now, they are actually making everybody feel horrible.
Right.
Everybody's guilty about the deficit. The young are not finding any jobs. Everything is lopsided. China is growing, the others are not growing. The developing world, the rest of the developing world could be growing. We have migrations that are making problems everywhere because the developing world is not developing. Well, something has to be done for that too.
I want to get one last thing, and we've got 15 seconds left. You believe that the leadership that's going to lead us to this new way of living, new way of consumption, new way of organizing needs to come from this technological surge. It can't come from a prior one. It needs to come from the generation.
Yeah, right now it's the dinosaurs and in government and in business that are leading what's happening. We need the new people to take a real political stand and to think of the future and to push towards the future by acting, and by acting politically clearly.
All right. Well, that's all of you in the audience, so you've been charged. Go out and get it done. Thank you.